Welcome to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chasing the Goal podcast, your destination for all things lacrosse. I'm your host, Kyle Devitt, and we might have a new co-host.
Trial run.
We're giving him a try. Westwood's own Hart.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Wow.
Love it. Yep. Trial run in progress. See how it goes. We have a long meeting after this to see how it goes. Yeah. I'm up for it.
It'll be 20 seconds. I didn't clear this with anyone because I am the guy that asks for forgiveness, not permission. So Owen's here. We're going to try it out. And we have a great guest in studio, Lawrence Academy head coach Sam Cleveland. What's up, man?
What's up, Kyle? How's it going?
Long time no see.
Has been a long time.
Kyle, pardon me, producer Dave. Sorry to butt in here, but it says here on the agenda we're supposed to spend the first 15 minutes talking about your hair and how out of control it is. So I think it speaks for itself for those watching on YouTube. If not, picture that character Samson, just shorter.
I went real Devin Sawa with it for 90s reference. And I hear the middle part is cool. So I'm trying it out. I know it looks bad, just so everyone knows. And there's nothing you can do about it.
It looks like, what was his name? Joey Lawrence from, you know that guy?
Whoa.
That guy?
Whoa. I do know. Yeah, I do. No, these two have no idea who that is.
I know.
But I do, and that's very nice. Thank you very much.
Right.
I was called that in high school a couple times.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry I interrupted you in introducing the guest. Carry on.
It's totally fine. Sam, let's just talk about your beginning, right, in lacrosse.
Sure.
Where'd you grow up? How'd you come to the sport? And, where'd you end up playing?
Yeah, so I grew up locally, Arlington, Mass. I started playing the sport, I guess, relatively early, at least as I saw it, around like 4th or 5th grade. I first picked up a stick. Arlington's a big hockey and soccer town. Thankfully for me and my parents, I never actually picked up hockey, and so I was a major soccer player, and I don't actually remember how I came around to picking up a stick. As it turned out to me, as I learned, my father played lacrosse at Cornell, so he never forced it on me, though. He never threw a stick in my hands right when I was born, but 4th, 5th grade, I picked up a stick, started playing it like recreationally for the town. We actually had, at the time, Arlington High School's varsity program was solid, and we had a growing youth program, so I picked it up with a couple local friends, played it as my secondary sport, like 4th, 5th into 6th grade, and somewhere in that range, I started to get really into it. I just enjoyed practicing the sport more than I did soccer and other sports, and obviously had a special relationship with my dad, who I was able to play with a ton, and he was able to coach me and do a good job keeping me sane and helping me practice. So 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I started to get really into the sport. I feel like I'm a million years old because I don't think I even had a conception of what club lacrosse was at the time, and obviously, especially in our area, we have a lot of kids who are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old who have been playing club lacrosse for over half their life. So I didn't even know what club lacrosse was until I was about in 8th grade. And at the time, there was probably way less club lacrosse options. So I did, a couple clubs that, what we would call now are like daddy ball, which is just a couple dads like throwing together a team and playing around just at a couple summer tournaments. Somewhere along the way, I had heard of the Clams, which at the time were one of the strongest programs in the area. Heard about them, found out, that the best way to try out was by going to a summer camp. So I went to their summer camp and tried out, and to my recollection, maybe I've repressed the memory, I'm not actually sure I made it all the way through the camp. So I certainly did not make the team. After that, played another year. I think that was all the way through my freshman year at Arlington High, where I was not even on the varsity team. My parents like to say that I should have been, but I'm not actually sure I should have. I was not particularly good. I was a skilled player, but I was never particularly fast, nor strong, nor aggressive. Another year went by, and I decided to try my hand again at trying out for the Clams. This time I was more ready, and I'm almost positive I made it all the way through camp. Didn't make the team, and at that time I swore them and all of club lacrosse off in a rage. Ended up playing for a local club that's long defunct called the Blues, which was a lot of like Newton and some Winchester kids. Did that for a year. Finally got my hopes up again, went back and tried out for the Clams a 3rd or 4th or 5th time, I can never remember. Finally eked my way onto the end of a summer roster at a wonderful tournament down in Delaware called Hotbeds, which is where you went down to Delaware for 4 or 5 days, stayed in the dorms, they bust you around to the games, and it was a grand old time in the blazing heat. Ended up getting a spot on the Clams for that fall. So I was actually finally a full-time member of the team. This was going into my junior year of high school. So the first time I was really part of like an annual, full year club program and had a solid spot on a team was going into junior year. After that, I started to get really good. Obviously, I'm a big guy, so I finally kind of reached closer to my full height and started to put on some weight. Started to play well. I was a 2014 at the time, and the director of the club caught, I caught his eye, I guess, as a player with some potential. He recruited me over to the Rivers School, where I ended up repeating my junior year, and really before I even started at Rivers in the fall of 2013, I had gone up to a prospect day at Colgate where I had played really well. Coach offered me a spot. I took it and was committed for my entire duration of time at Rivers, where I played 2 seasons, and the rest is history, on to upstate New York.
Right. You played 4 years at Colgate.
I did.
Colgate, well known within people that follow the Patriot League, maybe not so much around here or nationally as much as they used to be. I know it as where Peter Baum came from.
Of course.
And several other good players, but he's the guy that pops out when you say that school, and I knew Murph a little bit throughout the years. What was your experience like up there?
Yeah, so obviously Peter Baum, makes me sound or feel even older. Is like at the time I was getting recruited, we were a year out from Peter Baum, so that was a place where a Tewaaraton winner had just been. So obviously the school had a little bit of a buzz and a little bit of ring, and obviously good player on a great team where I think they beat undefeated UMass in the spring of 2011 or 2012.
I was there. I covered that game.
Exactly.
My phone overheated and so did my computer. It was amazing.
Yeah, so I obviously watched that, and obviously I was still a young player at the time, so kind of emulated that and fell in love with the way they were playing and didn't really know much about the school. Like you said, it's a really well-known school within some circles and some niches, but almost completely unknown to people outside of that, even in Massachusetts. So from there, I went up to Colgate, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. Obviously, Division I lacrosse is challenging, and we had a coach that really pushed us and challenged us. And it was cold and it was hard. And obviously, the Patriot League is not literally the most competitive league, but we always like to joke that it was kind of a meat grinder where all the teams would just beat up on each other incessantly, and at the end of the season, no one would actually come out able to win an NCAA tournament game because we were so tired from dealing with each other. So, it was a really intense experience. I was lucky enough to play more or less every single minute of every single game, or start almost every single game that I played there, which, I was really fortunate to do. So, getting playing time is really important in college, and would be one of my biggest pieces of advice to kids who are trying to get recruited, to try and find a place where you'll be challenged, but you'll also have access to the field. And yeah, so I was really lucky to do that. It was hard. It was cold, but it was also a really rewarding developmental and obviously educational experience off the field.
Just go back to talking about being at Arlington. You said didn't make team as a freshman varsity and got cut from Clams a couple times. I feel like kids nowadays, it's like if they don't make varsity as a freshman, it's like, oh, like my dreams of playing college lacrosse are done. I'm not on Clams. I'm not going to get recruited. Just like, how did you deal with that? Were you even thinking about that at the time? And what would you give to advice to kids nowadays who maybe go through that same situation?
Yeah, so obviously I experienced that too as a coach, like dealing with kids who are going through that. I always say, one, I was lucky enough to be, like, I keep calling myself old. I'm actually not that old, but completely naive to the fact that I wasn't good, at least relative to the world. Like, I didn't know. All I knew is that I didn't make varsity. I didn't know that, let alone did I not make varsity at Arlington, but I would never make it at a prep school or, a top 20 school or in Maryland or Long Island. Like, it didn't register. So the limit to which I could be discouraged, there was a finite amount of discouragement I could have. And so, I was still a kid, so I just played JV, and I was still at the stage of my career where I was like learning how to string sticks and having terrible looking sticks and strings and socks and gear and all that. So how I dealt with it was I kept working. And, one of the things that I feel really fortunate for in my career is that I just enjoyed practicing. I've heard people say on other podcasts and, you know, in YouTube videos where they talk is trying to get across the idea that it shouldn't always feel like a grind. And obviously hard work is important. I think pushing yourself and getting out of your comfort zone is important. But for me, I enjoyed practicing. I enjoyed playing wall ball. I enjoyed going out and shooting on goalies or with my dad or with my friends. And over time, you know, all those hours accumulated and I think made me the player that I ended up being. But in the meantime, you know, I think kids who really get down about not making varsity or not making club and continue to do so when they don't get those results need to do a little bit of self-reflection on why that damages them so much. And, you know, again, I went through this too. I'm a completely normal person, but it's oftentimes a damaging of the ego or the identity where suddenly if you're not a good lacrosse player, then what am I? And I think everyone can go through stages of that at various points in their career, whether they don't play in college, they don't play in high school, they go D3 instead of D1. It applies to a lot of players at a lot of different levels that as soon as you start to fail, your reaction is a catastrophic one because it's an attack on your identity and who you are as a person. And I think that's completely natural and normal. But as the old adage goes about getting recruited, you want to be able to go to a place where, say, if you broke your leg, you'd be able to enjoy it. And I think what happens a lot of times is people commit to a place or go to a prep school or just generally attach their entire identity to the sport. And when that unravels, either through their fault or someone else's, disaster strikes. And I think that's what's going on for a lot of kids and players when that happens. And certainly occurred for me at times, but I was thankful that I was able to at least make it through high school before anything like that happened.
I was telling Owen when he came in to the studio how when I went to Hopkinton, my first practice, I watched everyone practice. And then I was like, guys, I'm here to tell you some stuff. And they're like, okay, like who are you? Like I'm literally first day. And I was like, I just want everyone to know there's no D1 players on this field. There's also no D2 players in this field. And you will be lucky if you play Division 3. And they all were like, what? Not even the best? I'm like, no, not even him. And I love this kid now. Like he ended up being one of my favorite players. Looked him red in the eye. I'm like, you're not going to Hopkins. You're not going to Syracuse, my man. It's not happening. And I think he was a junior, maybe he was a sophomore. And the look he gave back was like, I'm not. You know? And I'm like, this is a Division 3 NHIAA school. What? Just because you guys win doesn't mean you're good. And they kind of were like, what? Is that? They're looking at the other coach. The other coach is horrified. He's like, I didn't know you were going to come in and do it. You know, like he's just staring at me like, what are you doing, dude? And I'm like, but here's the good news. I'm going to put everything in perspective for you guys and get you better. That's what's going to happen. That's my only thing I'm promising you. I'm not promising you championships or all-state. I'm not doing any of that. I'm coming in here with my knowledge base, which it's a small town. I'm not trying to big up myself. They just hadn't seen someone with that much coaching experience because, again, people listening to the podcast, I coached college for 12 years. It was brutal. I played Division 2 and Division 3. It was brutal. But I learned the lesson that you were talking about where you have to, people say embrace the grind, and grind is a bad word. And it is to a lot of people. But to me, like, I remember the day I found it, the thing that made me want to do it. I went to the field by myself, and I had stolen the ball bucket from outside my coach's office in college. I just dumped it, and I just started shooting on the net. It's cold. I think it must have been like 40 out. I'm smashing the ball. I'm losing. I lost like half the balls. I bring it back, and I tried to sneak it back, and he's in the office. And I'm like, maybe I can leave it to the side right here. And he's like, hey. And I was like, hey, coach, what's up? He was a new coach. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, lost some of the balls. He's like, how? I was like, just shooting. He's like, why? And I was like, because I want to get better. And he's like, who else went with you? I'm like, nobody. He's like, did you ask them? I'm like, no. He's like, how do you expect to be captain if you're going to do that? And I was like, okay. Should I not do that? And he's like, no, it's fine. And I just left. And I remember walking out and being like, am I in trouble or was that good? Like one of those things. But that building that, and to this day, the reason I tell that story is to this day, my favorite thing in the world, honestly, is to grab a bucket of balls, fresh ones if you can get them, and just dump them. At the end of practice, that's what I love. I love it. The kids are like, "Why are you still shooting?" And I'm like, "They're like, you're old, you're small. What are you doing?" And I'm just like, "I just like shooting, man. It's like my favorite thing." I feel like there has to be something that you love about the sport you're playing to, again, I don't like the word grind, to work at to a point where you love it even though it sucks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, what I've always said to kids and what I've come to believe about the sport myself recently is that lacrosse is hard. The skill threshold in lacrosse is a little bit different than other sports where like simply the act of catching and throwing takes time to learn. It's not a basketball or, you know, catching a football like most people can learn how to do pretty quickly, or a semi-athletic kid, but lacrosse takes time. And in order to enjoy something, you have to have a baseline level of competence. So I think sometimes in lacrosse, it takes maybe not years, maybe for some people years, time to just be good enough where shooting is enjoyable in the first place.
Right.
Because even for kids that have been playing for a year or 2 or 3 in club and don't practice enough on their own, it's not fun to go out there and miss every time. You have to be able to hit the corner or do something well enough with enough frequency that you actually get feedback that you're doing it correctly. And I found lacrosse to be tricky in that regard, that it takes a lot of time and investment up front so you can enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
Just going back a little bit, talking about like dealing with like kids, you know, we're all high school coaches. Everybody wants to go play recruited.
Yeah.
Sometimes what's good for the geese is always good for the gander. How do you balance maximizing winning for your team, but also maybe doing what's best for an individual player, whether it's like how you got to balance certain matchups or how maybe even positions. If somebody's a different position on different possessions, like how do you kind of deal with that game to game, week to week, year to year?
Yeah. So my philosophy has evolved into, you have to understand the context of the situation that you're in as a coach. So for me, during the 12 weeks led to the season, it's about the team. There's ample time to develop as an individual in the 40 weeks that don't constitute the season. So there's a lot of individual development that can come from learning team concepts, you know, playing different positions, all of that. But during the 12 weeks that are the season, I don't have much concern for developing specific individuals instead of developing the team. I think there's plenty of individual development that goes on in learning how to do two-man game, uneven, you know, odd man, up a goal, down a goal, situational stuff. That's all part of individual development, but it all needs to come within the context of the team and attempting to win or at least achieve as competitive results as possible. And then the time for focusing on individual development can come after the season. That doesn't mean we don't do individual meetings and talk to players about what they need to work on specifically, what they can be doing before practice, after practice, and all of that. But the number one priority during the season is not necessarily winning at all costs, but, you know, achieving as great of an outcome as we can in every given game and over the course of the season, and then we can do a little bit more of an individual focus or priority in the 40 weeks that constitute the off season.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a coach in the ISL, as we know, we cover a ton of ISL here at NELJ. It's like gauntlet is not even fair. It's like spiked gauntlet hitting you in the face consistently on like a treadmill. At Lawrence Academy, you're bringing in kids who maybe you know from club or you've seen out and things like that. How difficult is it to build the squad you want and keep it not above I don't want to say above board because then it implies there's below board, but like keep it in a way that's healthy. Keep it a way that's healthy. How about that?
Yeah, well, it's high school sports. And I think if you saw me or many other coaches on the sidelines of ISL games, you'd be quick to remind us that it's only high school sports. But to get to your point, it's intensely competitive. It's also a 16-team league, which is borderline not really a league and more of like a conference or even a division.
It's like the largest prep league in the country.
And that's, you know, I had the thought on the way down here that it's almost can be equated to more like several leagues or an entire division in which there's little different, you know, subsections of teams that are more competitive with each other versus not with, you know, the other groupings of people. So, you know, trying to keep it all in perspective, like you're saying, I think Number one is probably having a clear set of expectations and priorities with myself and with the team, and therefore really with families and the school. And the more that priorities and expectations can be aligned, the less unnecessary friction there is. So if you have 7 or 8 kids who are expecting to either A, win the league, or be recruited to Division I because of their performance in the league, and then the rest of the team is kids who don't even play lacrosse as their first sport, there's going to be some friction there unless you start to get people to understand what the overall goal is and buy into that. And if they don't, want to buy into that goal or that doesn't work for them, there's there's 16 teams in the league, let alone the Founders League or the Lakes region. Like, there are other places for people with other goals, and it's never perfect. Let alone what the school wants, which is not just to have a really good lacrosse program, it's to have other good sports programs and arts, music, a good community, good academics, kids who stay out of trouble and actually add something to the overall culture of the school. So sometimes, and for the first couple of years at LA, it was a balancing act to try and achieve all those things. It still is to some degree, and every coach has to learn. I picked up a good piece of advice from another coach in the league, was you just have to know your lane. And you have to stay in your lane and just absolutely hammer it in terms of the types of kids you're recruiting, the quality of kids you're recruiting, what other sports they play, the fit at the school, all of those things. And if you just generally try to stay in your lane and don't expect that people are going to do things or act in a certain way, to your advantage, unnecessarily or without justification, then you end up usually being pretty happy. But just as the case with a lot of things in life, really high, unreasonable expectations can usually lead to disappointment for all parties involved.
Hey, it's Bobby Moran, Director of Athletics at Thayer Academy. You know what? Experience matters, and Thayer Academy's professional coaching staff understands how to work with each student athlete to help them succeed. Our coaches and faculty are committed to ensuring both 5th to 12th graders feel known, connected, and prepared. This is Thayer's secret sauce, nurturing each student to reach their full potential. Here, success is truly a team sport. Are you ready for your child to take the next step? See what Thayer has to offer at thayer.org. That's THAYER.org.
Are you serious about playing your sport in college? Do you need a flexible education that allows you to maintain your practice and competition schedules while also preparing you to succeed at the next level? You should check out the University of Nebraska High School. UNHS is accredited and offers more than 100 online courses, including NCAA-approved courses to protect your academic eligibility. Students could earn a UNHS diploma or take a single course for transfer credit. Courses are college prep, self-paced, and available 24/7, 365. Enroll anytime and take up to a year to complete a course. Visit highschool.nebraska.edu today.
Speaking of how large the league is, and
Yeah.
in the era we're in terms of professional sports free agency and the transfer portal, have you seen any of that trickle down to the prep level where kids are kind of hopping around a little bit? I don't want to get you in trouble.
No. So I guess first off, generally within the ISL, there's one of the things that we do coaches meetings every year, and one thing that's continuously harped on is that you are not supposed to be recruiting at all within the league, and there's actually a set of procedures that you're supposed to go through if there's ever a sniff or an inch or an indication that there's interest for a kid to be transferring from one school to another. I don't think people really ever violate that to any degree that could ever be measured. I started to feel like, for the most part, prep school is prep schools in general are one of the last safe bastions of people not hopping around. In terms of, I'm sure there's a perception in club that people hop around a ton, which is generally true.
It's earned.
Yes, it's earned.
I didn't say it.
And perhaps rightfully so. But prep school, there's some jumping around. Kids transfer, kids leave. Oftentimes when kids leave prep schools, it's not necessarily of their own choosing. But generally speaking, there's not a ton of, I guess the word for it would be poaching from other prep schools. Yeah. It's a really small community that's generally frowned upon, and unless you're very sure you're going to be able to create one of the best teams in the country really quickly, it's not something you'd really want to get into. So no, there's not a ton of jumping around. I don't hear a lot about it. I think it's something that coaches worry about. Coaches who work at schools where they have a middle school. Kids will leave that middle school to go to a different high school, which is a little bit different because you do always have to apply for the high school, as opposed to going from 10th to 11th grade where you don't have to reapply. So hopefully it stays that way, because that would be, it's one thing to lose games. It's another thing to have to worry about if kids are going to leave because you start losing games. So that, loyalty is fun to have there, and I hope it stays that way. But obviously it's super competitive and kids want a lot. And with the way things are going in college and obviously in club, I wouldn't be surprised to see it start going that way, but I haven't seen any indication that it's going to.
You said earlier, everyone kind of has to stay in their lane.
Yeah.
What is Lawrence Academy's lane?
It's a good question. So, I've always struggled to find the actually articulate words to say it. I think I've said this to you in the past, that Lawrence is a really chill place. And I've moved away from using that terminology. And I still use a lot of analogies when I coach and talk to people. So I'll always say, Lawrence is the Vermont of the ISL. Like, it's a little bit more of a relaxed place. Like, we're not wearing coat and ties. Kids is, all the way down from the minutia of like what kids are wearing at the school, to something way more quantifiable, like the feeling you get when you walk on campus and the way kids walk around. They're, in my views, like their shoulders are a little bit less tense. They're sweating a little bit less. They're smiling a little bit more. They seem to walk like 10% slower. There's people aren't in a huge, massive urban rush to go places to get 99s instead of 98s on tests. So for better, for worse, and it's mostly for better, it's a really relaxed place with a lot of really nice, kind people who also want to work hard and build something special. And I think, the challenge, like I said, for any given coach is to stay within the lane of the school. But it's also important for the school to understand its own lane and try and help coaches understand who they should and shouldn't be recruiting to the school and who's going to get in and who's going to come. And that's been part of my learning process. But it's a relatively more relaxed place. Academically, it's more accessible. Athletically, for some teams, it's not accessible at all. The football program's really strong. The hockey program's incredibly strong. It's almost actually hard to recruit kids to the school sometimes if they're like a good hockey player but a great lacrosse player, because you have to be outstanding to get on the ice. So a unique challenge that no one would understand unless you were in the niche within a niche that is the ISL. But yeah, it's a relaxed place. They, as a coach, and I think to the students, there's a little bit more leash, but they'll always say they're trying to give kids the tools they need to become the person they want to be. And so if that means coach them hard and, a little bit more old school, a little bit more traditional, and that's great and fine, and they'll let that happen and they'll encourage it. And if it's a bit more new agey, take it easy on them and let them express their feelings, that happens too.
Yeah. In terms of just like the ISL schedule, I know that makes it how it is, depending on like records and like that. How do you go about setting your non-ISL schedule? Do you have any power over that? And if so, what's your philosophy going into making that? Yeah, so we have power over that. I think every school is probably going to approach their outer leagues differently. Where we come from and where I'm coming from now as a program is I'm trying to get wins on the schedule, but have them mean something to the team, which is a really tight it's a tightrope to try and walk where I don't want to go find blowouts in either direction. We suffer plenty of those in the league, and we don't want to go do them out of league. So ideally, we're looking for games that are close. So we do have control over that. During the ISL season is really hard because we are religiously Wednesday, Saturday. So if we're squeezing in and out of league, it's always on a Monday. And then you have the choices if you're going to do it in a week where you're playing two really good teams. Do you want to try to squeeze in a win that week, knowing you're going to get physically beat up later in the week and risk like fatigue and injury? Or do you try and put it in a week where the ISL schedule is less strenuous but risk being too tired for the ISL game? So let alone when people can get to fields and what fields are available and what schools are available. So you reach out early, like that's what you do right now, and email coaches, see if they want to play, see if you can find a Monday that works. Maybe at the very end of the season, after the tournament, maybe way at the beginning before the actual ISL season gets underway, and try and squeeze them in. But we only play, maybe a scrimmage or two, and then 3 out of leagues at most.
Let's talk about last year.
Sure.
You guys went 7-11. Some fairly notable wins. You get that OT one over BB&N, and beating up your local rival, Worcester Academy, which it's like Pinkerton, where that's the school for Worcester or for Westford. But, Worcester.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, That's my fault.
That's the New Hampshire coming out.
It is. It is. That was totally the New Hampshire coming out. I apologize for that.
We did beat our local rival, though, Groton,
Yes.
which is in the same town.
Yes. At the end of the season, right?
Yes, last game.
Local ISL rival Zebras.
Yes.
See, I do have some knowledge left.
There we go. He's back.
It is November. We're trying to get everything set. Going through, you've been through the playoff system now a little bit. How did you attack that when that happened? Like, what were your thoughts on it, and how do you think it's how do you think it's affected your program?
Oh, the playoffs. Yeah, so how I would attack it, being a school that only has 200 boys and only so many of which can play lacrosse, is be healthy. You know, especially in high school sports, like the best ability is availability. And so we don't and never will have an increasingly deep roster where there's like kids committed to playing college that don't get playing time. You know, certainly not like anyone who's going high D3 or D1 at all. So I would say, one, like, be healthy and be feeling good going into the playoffs. They're high schoolers and it's the playoffs, and they take it very seriously, so anything can happen. And I think just being as confident and healthy going into it is at least 75% of the battle for me. The effect I've had on the program, I think there's mixed thoughts about the way the tournament is done, and, you know, there's a whole, what could be not so aptly described as a loser's bracket where the bottom 8 teams have to play each other.
It's such a not a nice thing to say, but like the secondary playoffs or something. Like, what do you call that?
The people aren't losers, but they did lose in order to get there. So I enjoy that. You know, there's some people think that, you know, calling it the loser's bracket or the consolation or just identifying beforehand that the games don't matter is discouraging to the kids. But you know, the ISL does it in hockey where they have I guess a more competitive grouping and a less competitive grouping, and they do it in football, big school, small school, and all that stuff too. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't happen in lacrosse, and I think the playoffs are a good way to test that, or at least do it. So I've enjoyed it. It gives us hopefully some winnable games, and I think that's what almost everyone who's in the bottom, maybe not the bottom 8, but at least the bottom 6 or 7 is looking for at the end of the season, is just some winnable games when we're actually playing our best lacrosse. It's a high school sports season. You know this, like day 1 to day 75 is astronomically different. So I'd like to get more lacrosse in around day 75 than I would around day 1.
Yeah, just going back through some of your commits, guys you've sent out.
Yeah.
Very Liberty League heavy as of late.
Yep.
How has that transpired? And I think, you know, when I tier out things for people do ask me this a lot, where they're like, okay, so how would you do the tiers of academics for a college lacrosse program? I'm like, Ivy League, NESCAC, Patriot League, Liberty League. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yes. And like, if you want to challenge me, go ahead. You're wrong. That's literally how it goes. I'm sorry. Like, in terms of how you get in, not experience. Everyone wants a good experience, but how to get in, it's those things. And getting kids into a Liberty League, I've helped one of my kids get into Liberty League, and I was so excited that I cried. So I think it's amazing that kids are playing in that. You're sending kids to Skidmore, Union, Vassar. Like, these are excellent academic schools. It's kind of like why kids go to prep school a little bit.
Sure.
What's your take on that? Is that like a little too wild for me, or is that?
No, that's not wild at all. I think you're exactly right that in some ways that's why people go to prep school, to not only prepare them to go to those places, but to actually gain entry into places they wouldn't be able to gain entry into otherwise. And so, like you said, they're all really great academic institutions. So part number 1 is them having the grades to be able to do so. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't have much control over what they do in the classroom. So that's the start. And then depending on the kid, you know, it might be the type of kid who has thought about Division I. And then by the time sophomore year and closer to the beginning of junior year rolls around, there starts to be a realization or a feeling that we don't want that to happen. And then it's thinking about, you know, what we want their school experience to be, like geographically where they want to be, big, small, all that. And, you know, obviously I think, you know, demographically, locationally, and in some ways academically, it's pretty similar to the NESCAC. And so, like I said, if they have the grades and they're a really good player, most of the time those schools sometimes come knocking for the right player because they know to fish where the fish are. And oftentimes kids that go to prep school have the resources and desire to end up at a Liberty League school or an SCAC school or, even a Patriot or an Ivy. So the kid has to have good enough grades, and, similarly, like, they have to be good enough at the sport. So oftentimes kids that we're sending to the Liberty League are slightly physically smaller kids that are extremely athletic, good kids, smart kids, and kids that are okay with a little bit of a smaller school experience somewhere like Schenectady or near Saratoga or, for lack of a better term, in the middle of nowhere. And I can say that because I went to Colgate.
Right.
So as always with any recruiting, it's really just a combination of where they are academically and where they are athletically and lacrosse-wise, and then what they want out of it. There's a lot of kids with similar builds and maybe similar abilities that didn't want to go to a small school and end up at a Fairfield or end up at a Providence as a regular, club lacrosse playing student. So a lot of that comes down to them wanting the school. And I think just as much as kids want to go to a place where they feel like they're wanted, a lot of those teams, along with looking for good athletes, great students, and good kids, are also looking for kids that really want to be at the school and aren't looking to trade up into a Bowdoin or an Amherst or let alone an Ivy or a Patriot League school. So once we've identified that the kid wants the school and they have the grades to do it and the family's okay and able to make it happen and they are able to play, you reach out to the right people, see where you can get a visit, and then it's just like any other recruiting process.
You've dealt with both club process and high school process.
Sure.
And the faculty and coaching part. Like, how have you handled the recruiting on your end? And I know a lot of high school coaches say that their phone doesn't really ring as much as the club coaches. Just what's been your experience with that, and just kind of your opinion on how that all plays out?
Yeah, so my phone definitely doesn't and shouldn't ring as much as the club coaches. At the end of the day, that's what clubs are in, for a large part, at least for high school players, they're paid to do. That's the service that they offer, partially, is to help kids get recruited. More recently, my phone never rings. I'm usually the one calling. Occasionally, if my phone is ringing, it's to basically give a reference about a kid. Sometimes high school coaches, or oftentimes, will know a kid better and be able to speak to the kids, their character, where they're coming from, and other things like if we offer this kid, is he going to take it? Like I said, coaches and programs want to feel wanted too, and they don't want to. The term is they don't want to drop their pants and then have the person be able to not, or just not take the offer or try and trade it up. When my phone's ringing, it's for personal references. And, these days when I'm calling coaches, it's to help give the kid a little bit, usually to either give a reference and support the kid. I always like to say, like, I usually play cheerleader for you. Like, I'm not going to tell the coach, don't take this kid, or, I'm not playing games. With my high school players, I'm just trying to help them get recruited. If a kid says, can you call, the Hopkins coach for me? I will tell them no if they're not able to play there. I'm not going to just call whoever they want. A lot of the times I'm just a secondary information source. Clubs can get really big, and for all sorts of reasons that aren't really anyone's fault, families and kids don't always feel super comfortable just like texting or calling the club director and asking like, hey, where do I stand? Why haven't you reached out to whoever for me yet? And typically as the high school coach, you have a more personal relationship with them, so they can call you and ask you, and they can vent a little bit, or they can ask you to do a favor for them, and call a college coach and just be like, look, can you see where he stands? And so I'm always more than happy to do that. And in the process, sometimes you can help kids get recruited, but most of the time, and I assume it's the case for a lot of club directors too, it's not a sales job where you're like completely selling a college coach on a kid. You have to make the coach aware of that kid, and the kid obviously has to be good enough, and from there's all sorts of things you can do, and part of it's a negotiation process. But like I said, most of the time I'm a reference point or a cheerleader, and occasionally I'm part therapist, part information source for the families.
Yeah, it's good that you have boundaries. I'm really bad at doing that with my kids. I have kids call me at like 11 o'clock at night, like,
oh, no.
Coach, what do you think about this? And I'm like, I don't know, man.
I think you should go to bed.
I think you have a test tomorrow. Here's my hot question for you.
I'm ready.
What's your take on Reclass?
Oh boy. Well, I was a Reclass, so that's my
one.
that's like my disclaimer. If that makes me a sellout or am able to answer the question,
it gives you a unique perspective.
It gives me I don't know if it's unique these days, but look, I have a lot of different perspectives on it. I think one of the first things I say when I obviously get that question a lot is I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for boys of this day and age to take an extra year before they enter the world. I've heard interesting counter arguments to that, which is like, why would you take away a year of your potential working life? Like,
I mean, PG's not the same, but like I PG'd for that reason. Like I was not ready. I was immature and I'd never seen rules in my life. Yeah. And guess what? If I go to college with that, I don't make it through college.
And I've said to certain families who had applied to, like, I'm not sure if I had been 18 entering college instead of 19 that I would have made it through. Like that extra year of just the whatever small amount of emotional or physical development goes on, like, it matters. The reality is that it's happening. So we can, I can bemoan why it's happening and how it gives advantages to people that can afford to reclass, which is absolutely true. And that's the reality of the situation. It's here, it's not going anywhere. And especially, I know all the COVID years are gone from college or are about to be gone, but there's a lot of 22, 23, and even some 24-year-olds playing in college. And if you're expecting to go into a competitive D3, D2, or D1 program and earn playing time as a fresh 18-year-old, you have to be special. So, it has its advantages outside of the sport. I also think that if you look at who reclasses, it's a huge thing in New England. And there's kind of an interplay between the fact that we have places to reclass, like all of these prep schools. But it's also that for whatever reason, like, I was just listening to an episode you did, Kyle, I forget with who, where you said Massachusetts actually has like the most lacrosse players.
Yes.
And so the question I ask is like, so why aren't we the best players?
Right.
Why are Division I, D3, D2, or anywhere rosters not mostly Massachusetts and not, Manhasset or Cold Spring Harbor or upstate New York or, Baltimore or frankly the DC area or California or the Carolinas? And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people reclass, because they realize they're just not as good, right? A lot of the super hyper competitive people in this area that tend to reclass aren't doing so someone from Westwood can be better than someone from Dedham. It's so someone from Westwood can be better than someone from Baltimore or from Long Island, where for better or for worse, they're just better than us. And we're trying to find a way to keep our kids competitive and gain them entry into, the ultra uber elite schools and programs.
I mean, if you're just looking at, I have the answer for that. If you're just looking at New England and not Massachusetts, because I already make fun of Massachusetts so much on this podcast because I'm from New Hampshire.
We deserve it.
None of you can drive. I'm going to say it 100 times. The reason we're not as good as those other schools and those other regions, is we don't have the coaching. And you can argue that till you're blue in the face with me. I have worked in the industry for a long time, and I know probably within 10 minutes where someone's from. Not just based on where they play, but how they walk. Like it's a lot of confidence versus development, right? Like I do think, I don't know if this is true, but I'm pretty sure it's true. We also have the most club teams
I'm sure.
of any region in the entire country. And that's good and bad, because you would think the competition with that would develop better coaches. That's not always the case. Quantity does not equate to quality. On a long enough timeline, sure. But we're not on a long timeline, guys. Like, we have not had a lot of club development in this region yes, they blow up and they pop up all the time, and it feels like there's new ones every year, but they all kind of started in like 2000. Here, some of the teams were from the 90s, right? But in Maryland specifically, you are raised on it because you're generationally raised on it. The idea of prep schools for us is a option. To them, it's not an option. It's almost like a birthright. And I don't know how else to say that other than I'm sorry, I've talked to a bunch of people. I've worked down there, spent a lot of time in that region. If your dad went to Boys Latin, you're probably going to Boys Latin. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a heritage to it. I don't mean birthright as in however you want to take that. Sorry if I use that wrong. I'm an English major. I'm allowed to have hyperbole. The heritage of it is actually so ingrained in the culture and attached to lacrosse that it's crazy that you could go back and look at rosters from college teams from the 80s and 90s, and they're all from these schools. It's like you could draw a circle, and now the circle's the circles are different and the circles are bigger, but just because there's more people doesn't mean you're getting better instruction, you know. And club team guys, like, come at me, like, I don't care, like, you know, I'm right, like, honestly. And I'm not saying you're bad at your job at all. It's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're terrible at anything. I'm saying this much quantity, you have to have a highest level of coaching with the heritage to keep it going up like this. And it has been, but it's the graph is like this. It's not this.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot there. You know, one thing I would say, 2 points. One of them is that there's a feedback loop. So all the kids, not all the kids, a lot of kids that are from Long Island, upstate New York, Westchester County, New Jersey, Fairfield County, Baltimore, you know, Northern Virginia, their dads went to Hopkins. And so that's who's coaching their youth programs and their youth teams. So they get better, and then they go to better schools and they come back and continue. So there's a little bit of a loop there. But I also think, you know, look, it still is confusing to me how we play so much lacrosse, yet we don't get any, we get better. Other regions are getting better too. But I think that, you know, I'll say this delicately, like, club coaches are actually really good at their job.
Sure. It's
just unclear that their job is to make players better. And that's not really the primary and sole motivation and it's not just New England, that's everywhere. It's a club, it's a business. Yeah. So I think it's, for everyone, it's a delicate balance of, like, how to create a viable business, but also to what degree do you prioritize or sacrifice, you know, business interests for getting kids better at the sport. And it's hard and it's delicate. And a lot of guys who, like you said, I still think we're in maybe coming towards the end of, like, the first iteration of, like, what club lacrosse is.
Right.
It hasn't been around that long. And I think, you know, whatever iteration means and whatever change is going to be, you know, I have absolutely no idea. But I think it's still an interesting question open for debate, how and why we have so much club lacrosse and so many people so deeply, literally, like, emotionally, monetarily and, you know, financially, you know, and just physically invested in the sport. And yet development, at least from my perspective, doesn't happen quite as quickly as you would assume it would.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think there's potential for burnout. Obviously, these kids are playing X amount of games a week, multiple times a year. So that, monetary wise, it's crazy. Like, maybe we're going to come a couple years now where that's going to decrease and kids aren't. And then by the time they're in 7th grade, they've already played a billion club tournaments, and maybe they all drop it. Like, I had a kid, he was a Fogo, and he's at a tournament 7 hours to take a couple face-offs and step off the field, and that's what he did. And he dropped it. He dropped club because he's like, it's not worth. I'm probably not going to get money to play college lacrosse. It's not worth my time. It's not worth my money. And also it's in the summer. They're taking away that time. I'm curious to see if that trend happens at all. I can speak from perfect experience. I've had people end up having that be their decision.
Same. Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing too is, like, prep school is not for everybody. Club lacrosse is not for everybody. Being elite is not for everybody.
By definition.
Yes, that's what it means, guys. Yep. That's what the word means. I think people look too hard into what lacrosse can do for them and then never think about what have I done for lacrosse.
Yeah.
It's kind of my thing. I hate that.
Using the sport.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what the industry is, and that's what that's not what the industry is, but part of what goes on is it's just treating the sport as instrumental value. Like, we're using the sport as an instrument to get something else. And that's all well and good, but it comes back to what we talked about right at the beginning of the conversation, which was there has to be some element of it that you just enjoy for the sake of itself.
Yeah.
And when push comes to shove, when it's 90 degrees out and you're in Delaware and you're taking 2 face-offs and getting off the field, or it costs an arm and a leg and your family's making all sorts of time and money sacrifices to do it, you have to like it and enjoy it. It doesn't matter how much you want to go to Bowdoin. Like, it's not going to work.
If you don't have the grades and you're not good enough, you're not going to go. Like, I don't want people to listen to this and get discouraged. I really don't. Yeah. I want people to listen to this and be a little bit more informed of the prep school experience, the club experience, and lacrosse in general can do so much for you. I'm not disparaging it, and I know it probably sounds like it because I was like, oh, the coaches are bad. That's not what I meant. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the ingrained ability to play the sport is in some ways geographical, because of the heritage of it. Like I'm like, there's a reason the word hotbeds keeps getting thrown around, and it's not because it's the name of a tournament. You know what I mean? It's because it's true. It's because these kids are developed because they're, like you said, their dads went to Hopkins or Cornell or these other places, and then they became like, oh, I will give you all these things. Like, I had a great life. I'll help you get that life. And that's great. I'm not speaking against that at all, but I think that that's not as common when you have so many kids. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's less kids there playing. That's just a fact. It's a fact that there's less kids there. So there's more kids. So the other thing that comes with more, again, I sound like a downer, is more disappointment. Like, it can be very disappointing and disheartening to not get what you want. You talked about that earlier. But the thing that you learn is to get through that. The only way is through. Is you worked your way through that, and you did it with hard work. You did it with dedication, and you did a thing that helped you get into the college that gave you, I mean, for a lot of people, I don't know if that's true, but like, college helped me like develop an identity. Sure. It wasn't lacrosse. And then I was like, oh, I'm a writer? Weird. You know, like, college is great. Like, that's what college is for. And I think also that's what prep school is for. And I don't think that's what club is for, but that's another discussion. I don't know if that's a little too harsh on everything. We've talked a lot about relationships between prep and, I mean, you got two public school JV coaches here. we're
not going to relive those.
We're on we're not going to talk about coaching JV again. That was really sad. I want to end on kind of like a high note. Where do you see your contributions to the sport going? Where do you see that building and getting to after all the stuff we've talked about and in a positive way?
Yes, totally. So I think, you know, all of I wouldn't even say anything we just said is negative. I would say it's just calling a spade, and people can be a lot more negative and still have it be truthful. So, you know, but I think to speak a little bit more positively, like, wherever there's a lack of opportunity, a lack of knowledge, a lack of discipline, you know, a lack of feeling good about the sport, there's also opportunity. So, you know, one thing you said, Kyle, that's become more interesting to me is that, you know, lack of whatever, maybe not even a lack, just the quality of the coaching in different places. Like, to me, all I hear is that there's a ton of opportunity to teach coaches things. So whether that's bringing new coaches' ideas to people, you know, like one of my experiences basically functionally being a professional lacrosse coach for several years, like coaching at a prep school and coaching a ton for club, is that there's not even a lick of a discussion about like getting better at being a coach. But again, to me, that means we're just at square one. So where all the disappointment lies with families and kids and the lack of understanding about how prep school or reclassing or Division I versus Division III versus Division II works, I think there's just a ton of room for improvement. And I mean that only positively, that I think it's a strange niche industry where only people on the inside can even have a glimpse of understanding of how the heck it could work. Even if you play or played another sport, or you're smart as can be in business or whatever you do, lacrosse is weird and youth sports are weird and recruiting is a strange industry. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity just to help, you know, families understand the process better, help kids and families understand exactly what it takes to be really good at something, and, you know, really identify the degree to which they're willing to sacrifice things. You know, it's really easy to have goals, and I often instruct kids to try and set sacrifices instead of goals. Really look towards more like just think about what you're willing to give up. And if that list is really short, the list of your goals should be pretty short too, because everything has an opportunity cost. So again, helping coaches learn more different and more effective coaching strategies, helping parents and families understand what the heck is going on out there, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. I think people just need to understand, and will try to, you know, impart that knowledge as in an unbiased way as I can, which is probably not very unbiased. And then, you know, probably the most important thing, like, help kids understand how to get better. As crazy as it feels to me, like, I don't think a lot of even motivated people know exactly like what they should do when they roll on a bucket of balls. Like, should they be rolling on a bucket of balls? Should they be in the weight room? Should they be running? Should they be playing club? These are all questions I think that should be asked. You know, and it takes someone with experience and knowledge and of the ugly side, of the good side, to, you know, make sure people get the right answers. And, you know, not to sound hokey, but that's why a lot of people are involved in coaching, is to help younger people develop in the sport of choosing and help them enjoy it and help them get better. So it's a combination of all those things. And like I said, the more we criticize, the more you can just realize that there's a ton of opportunity. And, you know, that's what I see, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing in the next few years.
You're going to have to tell that to my email inbox after this podcast.
All right, I will.
It's going to be super fun. I think that's kind of all the time we have here.
Sure.
But thanks, Owen, for coming in and pinch hitting. You're doing a great job. And thank you again for listening to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chasing the Goal podcast. For Owen Hart, I'm Kyle Devitt. We'll see you next time.